Hello my sweet friends, and welcome to my channel where I share kinda shabby but always chic creative inspiration. My name is Becky and I thank you so much for joining me today for my final episode of the Summer Sewing Series. And although this series is coming to an end, I have so many more accessories that I have planned for us to sew together in the future. As we have created each one of these accessories together, these have all been my own patterns that I have drawn myself. But for today's bucket hat tutorial, this is not my pattern and I will link it for you below. And I'm also going to be making a few modifications to this pattern that I think you're going to enjoy as well. Well, there is lots of fun in store today, so let's get this project started. I got my pattern from applegreencottage.com. It is a free pattern, but you do have to submit your email address in order to receive the link to the download. After printing, I used some carbon paper and I traced it off onto some cardstock to cut out the size that I wanted, because she has 5 sizes in this pattern. And the size that I used is the adult large. This is what it looks like, but I am going to be doing mine just a little differently. I am still using the crown piece and the side band just as the pattern is written, but I want this brim piece to be bigger to be able to shield my eyes a little bit more from the sun. Take that brim piece and I taped it to another piece of cardstock. It went out 1.5 inches from that brim, so now it's going to be a sun hat and not just the bucket hat. I have already cut and marked my pieces. For the outer fabric, you have 1 crown piece, 2 side band pieces, and 2 brim pieces. They're actually cut on the fold, and at the fold, you're going to make a tiny little snip, and that's what you're going to use to line up to the marks that are on the crown piece. And you'll need those same pieces for the lining fabric as well. To begin assembly, take your brim pieces and you're going to open those up and place them right sides together. And then you are going to pin or clip along both of those raw edges. And then you'll pin or clip your remaining pieces right sides together. And we're going to stitch each one of these seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, holding your threads for a stitch or two, back stitch to the edge, and then stitching all the way down. And back stitching at the end of that seam. And you'll stitch all of your remaining pieces at the 3/8 inch seam allowance. Trim off all your threads and press your seams flat, and then press those seam allowances open. I like to press from both sides just to give it a neater appearance. Really helps those seams to lie nice and flat. And now we are going to top stitch down each side of our seam here, and that's going to be just a nice decorative stitch there. And I have increased my stitch length to 4, and I'm going to use the inside of my presser foot right along that seam to keep my stitches straight. And you don't need to back stitch because all of this is going to be caught up in the seam allowance. And you can see just how nice that looks. I will be stitching along each side of the seams that I have just sewn. Then after completing all of your stitches, remember to set your machine back to your standard stitch length. clip off all of your threads, and then press your stitching. It just makes it look so professional. And now we're going to join the crown with the side band. That is the smaller of your two remaining pieces here. And to make this edge fit around the crown more easily, on the inside smaller edge, you're going to make very small snips, and it gives a little bit of stretch and a little bit of ease to make these two pieces fit together. So take your time and make tiny little snips all the way around the inside edge of your side band, just like that. Your crown piece is slightly oval, and so this is the front and back, and then these are the sides. The instructions that come with your pattern tell you to put this seam at the front and at the back, but I don't like that look. So I match that seam to one of the sides and pin that into place. Then come across to the other side notch and match that seam and pin that into place. Then I match the fold line to the front notch and pin that into place. Then match the back notch to the other fold line and pin that into place. Then that band can be manipulated into place to match up all around those edges of the crown piece, and you'll pin all of that into place as well. And you can see that I use lots and lots and lots of pins, and you'll do that same thing with snipping the inside of the side band and attaching that to the crown of your lining piece as well. Starting at one of the side seams, we're going to stitch a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Hold your threads for about 2 stitches, back stitch to secure those, and then slowly stitch around this hat. And occasionally you are going to have to stop stitching, reposition your fabric as you come up to each one of these folded areas here, because we want that to be flat. And you also want to remove your pins. You don't want to sew over any of those. Then after you have flattened that area out again, we're going to stitch around to the next pin. Remove the pin, flatten it out, and then stitch around to the next pin. And you're going to do that same thing all around the side band of your hat. Then as we come back around to where we started, we're just going to keep sewing slowly toward that area. Go slightly past it, back stitch, and come forward again to secure those stitches. And then after stitching, I look to make sure that I have not sewn in any folds and that all of my stitching looks nice and straight, and it does. It looks really good. And you'll do that same thing to the lining piece as well. Then I'm going to use my tailor's ham to press that seam allowance down toward the side band. But if you don't have one of these, you could use a rolled up hand towel instead. That just looks so nice after getting all of that pressed down. I removed my sewing platform to have the free arm, and that just makes sewing this a little easier. And again, I am going to be using the inside of my presser foot here right along the seam as a guide to keep my stitches straight. Hold threads for a stitch or two, back stitch to secure those stitches, and then stitch slowly around the top of the side band. I'm not stretching the fabric, but I am making sure that it's going to lie flat as I stitch that seam to the side band. And that just really gives a nice little detail to the hat. So I'm going to finish stitching around the outer fabric, and then I will do the same thing to the lining fabric as well. And I'm going to give another quick press to my line of stitching. Pressing after stitching really does make everything look so much better. Now we're going to attach the brim to the rest of the hat, and you're going to do the same thing with this inner portion of the brim that you did to the side band. Little tiny snips into that fabric, which allows that fabric to stretch and give it some ease so it can be worked onto the band piece. So snip the inside edge of both pieces. And now you'll take your hat and place the brim piece with that edge that you just snipped around the side band. So match up your seams and pin that into place. Come to the other side and match that seam and pin that into place. Then match the fold to the side notch. Come to the other side and do the same thing. Then you will manipulate the brim and match it, slightly stretching it to fit onto the side band, and then pin that into place. And again, use lots of pins so it doesn't move on you when you go to sew it down. And once you get that pinned into place, you'll do the same thing with your lining fabric as well. And once again, after pinning everything into place, it is going to have that wavy appearance, just like it did when you pinned the crown to the side band. We're again starting at a side seam and stitching a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So hold your threads for a few stitches and then back stitch. And then once again, we're going to slowly stitch. Remove our pins, flatten out those little flounces, and just slowly stitch around to attach the brim. And stitching the brim to the side band is much easier than when you stitch the band to the crown, but you still want to take your time, making sure that you're not going to stitch any folds into the brim. And as you come up where you started, once again, you're going to stitch just slightly past that and back stitch to secure those stitches into place. And then you'll stitch the brim onto your lining piece just like you did for your outer fabric. And then we're going to press that seam down toward the brim. Then after pressing, go to your machine and top stitch this seam allowance down just like you did at the top right here on both pieces. And because I just demonstrated how to do that, I will be stitching mine off camera to save time in the video. And that's how your hat should look after top stitching that seam allowance down. And now it's time to put our hats together. Take my lining hat and place it on top of outer fabric hat. Match up those seams and then pin or clip that into place. Come around to the other seam, pinning or clipping into place. Matching up those notches on the outside of the brim. Matching up those notches on the other side. Then you will match up and pin or clip the remaining edges in place, but on one side of the hat I have double pinned because we are going to leave this section open so we can turn our hat right side out. And we're going to begin at our first double pinned area and stitching a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Hold threads for a few stitches and then back stitch. And then just keep stitching all around the outside of that brim, again using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then as we are coming back around to the area that has the double pins, we're going to remove those. Stitch a few stitches forward and back stitch to secure those stitches in place. And again, we've left about a 4-inch section open right here to turn our hat right side out. After trimming your threads, you're going to press that line of stitching. We're going to use pinking shears to trim the edge, but before we do that, we're going to make a snip on either side of our opening. That makes it easier when we go to stitch this opening closed. And then just trim close to the edge. And if you don't have pinking shears, you can take scissors and just make little notches in the fabric like that, because that's going to help that seam to lie flat when we turn everything right side out. And before turning right side out, I like to use a lint roller just to get up all that excess thread, any of those fibers, and then come to your opening. I like to reach in there and grab the crown of my lining and just very gently work this through until everything is right side out. And then I pull it apart and take the tip of my iron and just go right down that seam where we joined the brim pieces together. And do that all the way around until that seam looks nice and flat. Then tuck in the lining, and then you want to roll that seam allowance between your fingers, just working it flat. So one edge is on top of the other, and press that down and continue that same process all the way around the outside of your hat, so that seam where you've joined the two brim pieces together is going to lie flat. And then come to the opening and roll those seam allowances one on top of the other, and press those down as well. And put a few pins in there just so that opening stays closed. This time we are going to be stitching very close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch away, and that is going to give a decorative detail at the bottom, but it's also going to close this opening where we turned our hat right side out. And now that the opening is closed, continue stitching all the way around the bottom edge of your brim. And as we come back around, back stitch to secure those into place. And you can see how that is just right on the very edge there. That looks very nice. Now we are going to stitch multiple rows of stitching all across the brim to give that a finished detail. I've put the outer edge of my presser foot right up against that line of stitching where we just secured that bottom edge together, and we're going to stitch. Following that line of stitching all the way around the brim. And as we're coming around to the end, take a few back stitches. Then you're going to Trim those threads. Place your presser foot against that line of stitching. And again, continue all the way around the brim of your hat. And you do want to keep your hand underneath just to make sure that nothing is bunching up as you're stitching. And you're going to do that same thing, continuing to stitch those circles down on the brim. After clipping off your threads, go ahead and press those lines of stitching. And I press it from the lining side too. Your little hat is complete. And again, because this is reversible, you can have whichever side you want facing out. Absolutely adorable. These are really quick and easy to make. They make great gifts, and they're also extremely functional too. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been my pleasure to sew with you. And whether you choose to create the traditional style bucket hat, or you opt for the sun hat with the longer brim, I hope you found today's tutorial helpful. And until next time, my sweet friends, be blessed.